I think sometimes when you're on a show like this that is an ensemble show, you have certain characters whose, their primary role isn't to like serve the plot. It's more just to sort of function as like maybe a respite from the like driving plot. And I said I want her sort of how you interweave Yasmin into the plot to feel more sort of integral to this season. And then they wrote season 3.
So let's just get into it. Your performance and your character have been central to the show from day one, but season 3 really marked kind of a leveling up even from that point of Yasmin's centrality to the plot. Ahead of season 3, did you have any conversations with the creators and showrunners, Mickey Down and Conrad Kay, about what lay ahead for Yasmin and how they envisioned that unfolding?
Not in terms of like specifically plot. I didn't know what was coming in terms of what exactly Yasmin was going to be doing. They sort of had a conversation with me about like, what do you want? What do you want from season 3? And I think my exact sort of sentiment was that I wanted Yasmin to do some work. I'm not sure if that actually happened this season, but I basically, I think sometimes when you're on a show like this that is an ensemble show, you have certain characters whose, their primary role isn't to like serve the plot. It's more just to sort of function as like maybe a respite from the like driving plot. And I did say to them that, I think season 1 and 2 always felt like Yasmin's storyline herself was really interesting. But if you took it out, the Jenga thing wouldn't really all fall apart. Like you could kind of do without it. And I said, I want her sort of how you interweave Yasmin into the plot to feel more sort of integral to this season. And then they wrote season 3 and I was like, whoa, okay, great.
Well, Yasmin is kind of the last woman standing at Pierpoint now that Harper Stern has exited. And that means that your character got a lot of FaceTime with Eric Tao, Ken Loach's character. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like to work with him as a performer?
Ken's an amazing actor. It was another thing that I said actually in my meeting with him. Was like, I'd love to work with Ken. Thing about Ken is that he is a really, really present actor. So in rehearsals, when you're sort of blocking the scene out, it'll kind of be, he'll sort of be marking it, like where does he stand or where do we go? And then when you shoot, he's just really watching you. It's like, what are you going to do? And I'll react. And it's funny because it depends on the scene and it depends on the moment and like what's going on for Yasmin. But I've always liked to work like that too. So I think what that meant for the first couple episodes or the first couple moments of their relationship was that we were really just watching each other, which actually really works, I think, for the relationship, that they're trying to suss each other out as characters. I guess I wouldn't say that we were doing that as actors, but we were waiting to see what the other person was going to do first. So what was great about that scene in episode 1 where they've taken a lot of, coke and they're like partying together is that they're like forced to say everything. In a way, I've always felt like the writers did that on purpose so that we'd have no choice. But working with Ken is amazing because it really forces you back to that space as an actor of absolutely no pushing whatsoever. He's like a bit of a bullshit barometer, like it's not going to fly if you're pushing or if it's not authentic. He's really, really rooted in the truth of the moment.
It does really strike me that Mickey and Conrad went to you and asked you what you wanted to do. That sounds like a very rewarding way to work and collaborate with writers on television. Is that typical of the relationship you have with them?
Definitely. I think, they're so passionate about the show and they're so ambitious for the show. And in terms of they're not complacent, season 1, although it wasn't a sort of like huge, it didn't have a huge audience, it was successful critically, but it wasn't like enough for them. They knew that they wanted to do more, and I think they were always really grateful that we as actors were putting as much into the show as they felt that they were putting into it, because it's their show essentially, and it's their baby, you know. So I think by season 3, especially because, you know, we'd done other stuff now, it wasn't our first job, and you're giving 6 months of your time to this show, and I think they really felt like they wanted us to enjoy it, you know. I think that's a great place to come from as a collaborator, is like, how can I make this a really good experience for you for these 6 months?
So in addition to working with Ken, who's been on the show since day one, Yasmin enters this relationship with Henry Muk, who's played by Kit Harington. And speaking as a Game of Thrones fan, I did not know that he had that in him.
Yeah.
And I'm so curious what it was like building that relationship between Henry and Yasmin together.
I mean, it was great. It was, we'd have conversations about like what we thought it was drawing them to one another. You know, he's a really smart man. And I think it was easy to sort of find what Yasmin was falling for in Henry. You know, he has an amazing capacity to be vulnerable on screen. Kit does. And then Henry is like, that's his kind of shtick, is being vulnerable. So, you know, I think the writing is so clear to me what it is that Yasmin feels she's getting from Henry. But yeah, we had a great collaborative relationship. The first scene we filmed together was the scene in the restaurant where he's like telling her to look on her phone for the article. It's the first time that they meet as well in person. So wait, no, maybe not. But it was a really good moment. And then we go to the bathroom and all of that stuff. There isn't that much room in industry, especially in the romantic relationships, to hold back. So yeah, it was great. He's fantastic.
We'll return to the Henry Yasmin dynamic in a second, but on the subject of intimacy on this show, I read a comment somewhere on the internet that said the Rob and Yasmin scenes in the finale were like the only loving, healthy sex scenes they can remember seeing on Industry. And I'm curious what those scenes were like to film and if they felt at all different from the other kinds of intimate scenes that you've done on Industry.
Yes, that scene did feel different because it felt like they both, you know, I think the sex on Industry is incredibly transactional. And I think it's important as an actor when you're doing intimacy scenes, you know, to still treat it as you would any scene. What do I want out of this? What do I want from you? And quite often with Yasmin, I want to feel in control, you know, and it was always that with Robert in season 1. And then with Henry now, I think it's still that. It's slightly less kind of obtuse, but I think she wants to feel in control of this relationship and in more control of her life. Whereas that scene, I think, is the only time that for Yasmin an intimate scene has not been about being in control. It's been about letting go and being able to be vulnerable with someone who might love her in that moment. So it definitely was a different objective going into the scene. And I think it was the same for Harry with Robert. And also there were real feelings there, you know, for them. They really, at least in that moment, I don't know if I can say love each other, but they really want to love each other and be loved by the other person.
That scene takes place in Deepest, Darkest Somerset, to quote Yasmin. And, you know, even in just the finale, you see both of the major locations that Industry goes to this season. You go to Mallorca for episode 6, and you get a little bit of it in the finale. You go to this incredible manor house. And given how much time Industry previously spent on the trading floor, I'm wondering what that was like for you to film in and if it affected your performance at all.
I mean, definitely the sort of scale of the thing does affect, especially in terms of character, you know, for Yasmin. We've always known that Yasmin comes from this world of wealth but I think, you know, when you see someone interact with that world, how comfortable they are in it really just tells an audience so much about a person. You know, Yasmin on a yacht is different to Harper on a yacht and Yasmin in this big house in Somerset. I think I kept thinking about, there's a quote in, I'm gonna get it wrong now, but in Pride and Prejudice, where she says as she's coming up to Pemberley, she's like, what a thing it would be to be the Lady of Pemberley. And I couldn't stop thinking about that when I was as Yasmin coming up to this house, because it's like, you know, she's lost everything. She comes from such a place of privilege in her life. She's living in Robert's house in Finsbury Park. It's not particularly chic. And suddenly she's like rolling up to this thing, and I couldn't stop hearing that quote. And, you know, her like running her hand up and down the banisters and all of this like ancient artwork that's like priceless. She's ambitious, Yasmin, you know, at least financially. So the sensorial experience of that is great. I mean, the sensorial experience of a trading floor is also great. It's quite distressing. So they both work. But yeah, I mean, I've always felt, and this is, you know, why it was exciting for me that Yasmin, you know, ended up not in the bank, that Yasmin is a bit of a fish out of water at Pierpoint. I don't think she's particularly good at her job. So to have her in a different space where she might feel more comfortable was nice for me.
Yeah, part of that increasing comfort comes from that conversation Yasmin has with Henry's uncle, where he kind of spells out for her or implies what it would mean to join that family. And given that Yasmin's father looms so much over the season, it's really striking to see her have this very different kind of conversation with a very different kind of older man. What do you think that conversation meant for Yasmin?
I think Yasmin the whole season is like looking for a way out. You know, she's very desperate. She's in a very desperate situation. And I think she sees a sort of kindness and a softness in him. And I think that in that moment, he presents her with that way out. And, you know, it's just sort of up to her in that moment whether or not she's going to take it and what she does afterwards. You know, it's tricky. I think you can read it in a lot of different ways. Like, has she already made her mind up after that conversation and it's just sort of final hurrah? Or is that her way of trying to figure it out? For me as an actor, it was, I think that she knew I think she was like 99.9% sure in that conversation with Lord Norton that she wanted that. She wanted that safety, that lifeline. She was going to jump onto it. But she wanted Robert to prove her wrong. She wanted him to give her a different lifeline. And although it's a lovely moment for them, and I do think it does mean a lot to her, I don't think it's quite enough to say goodbye to the safety of this entire world, you know?
And to that end, so there's the glance that they lock into when they're seated at the dinner table, and there's that beautiful sort of optical illusion where it seems like it's just the two of them. And then there's the final glance when she's going off with the hunting party and he's going into his car to go off to hawk mushrooms.
Yeah.
And what was your read on like what's passing between those two characters in that final moment that they share?
I mean, I think that Robert gives Yasmin a sort of insane amount of grace. I think that they really do understand each other. And the great thing about, industry is that it's really, people have really enjoyed this season. I think it is a great season. But I think that you kind of need 1 and 2 to understand why Robert is so able to have that understanding of her. You know, they have this rich friendship from when they were 21 years old to now. And there's this kind of understanding of one another in a more meaningful way. You know, they've not only known each other for 5 minutes. That's a real relationship there. And I think in that moment, it's kind of all the history of all those years, you know, of course, this is the decision she was going to make. I understand because I understand you. Yeah, I think it's just about their sort of shared history in those moments. Yeah.
So Yasmin's father obviously is sort of the skeleton key to her entire personality. And we learn a lot more about what that relationship was like and what it constituted this season. But as a viewer, I mean, there's when his former employee in that final scene names the possibility of sexual abuse, it's still quite shocking, even though you've been primed as a viewer to kind of understand that there's a possibility there. Yeah. How did you receive that possibility in the context of Yasmin's history that we aren't privy to as viewers?
I think that there are more clues to it than like throughout. I mean, maybe not in season 1 because he wasn't a particularly present character. I remember having conversations with Mickey and Conrad in season 1 about, you know, Yasmin's sensuality and her relationship to her body. And I remember saying to them that I think she really sees herself through the male gaze. I think that that's an important thing to like understand about her from the beginning. And I think if you go back and you see her, it makes a lot of sense. She's super aware of herself physically. And I think that it's how she gets a lot of her power is like how men value her a lot of the time physically. And I think that often stems from the relationship with a father. And I think that, I was always aware that Yasmin had a complicated relationship with her father from season 1, and that potentially it was a physical relationship in some way or another, but that she was made aware of her body for the first time via him. And then there's a moment in season 2 at the bar where they have a big argument. I think it's in the final episode or maybe in the penultimate episode. And she says something to him like, you looked at me. I remember you looking at me. I remember when did you stop thinking of me as your little girl? Was it when I needed to wear a bra for the first time? And I think that, all of these things, I think that there was always an element of sort of a psychosexual abuse in their relationship that I was aware of, and that I felt. And then I think this season, it just became more of a question mark. Listen, in episode 1, I think there's a form of sexual abuse to see your father having sex with a woman, 69ing a pregnant woman in your bed. You know what I mean? He has his own bed. And like, to me, that's a form of abuse, you know? So I think it's up to an audience member to decide at this moment in time exactly what form that relationship took. I don't think it's important to particularly like nail down exactly. I think it's ambiguous in the show for a reason. But for me, yeah, I mean, I have my ideas.
So by the episode's end, it appears that Yasmin has fairly definitively exited the finance industry, the titular industry as we know it. What do you think Yasmin, the character, acquired from that working experience, since, as you say, she was not particularly good at it?
Well, I think that she learned that she wasn't particularly good at it. And I think that we've seen Yasmin grow up from season 1 to now. I don't think she'd ever put herself in a situation again where she was that out of her depth. I mean, Yasmin in season 3 is a very different woman to Yasmin in season 1. And we see elements of the power that she has in season 3, the sort of the internal strength that she has in season 3 in season 1. But that's often, again, in her sort of like very intimate relationships with either her friends or the men in her life. And I think that now she is much stronger. She's not getting salads for anyone anymore. She's definitely learned that lesson. And I think that she's only going to put herself in positions of power from now on, because that's where she feels comfortable. I also think that she's learned that the thing that she's best at is just kind of, is wheeling and dealing in more of a personal way than a sort of macro scale way. I think what she's good at is getting the right people in front of one another.
It's so I don't know if like lovely or touching is the word given their relationship, but it's so nice for Yasmin to call Harper and invite her to the wedding along with Barack Obama. And we don't see it much in this episode, but in the penultimate episode, there's that incredible confrontation between your characters in the kitchen of that Finsbury Park house. Yeah. What was that like to bring those tensions between Harper and Yasmin to their apex?
Oh, it was so rewarding. It was so good. I mean, Myha'la and I always want to do more together. For obvious reasons in the show, they kind of need to be on two separate paths so that there's like two things going on at once. But whenever we do get those scenes where we come together, let alone when all three of us are together, like even that little moment in the pub in whatever episode it is where the three of them are together, it's just so nice to work together. Yeah, I mean, that scene in particular, when we got that script through, you know, I mean, I have voice notes on my phone of being like, it's this, it's this, it's this. And then I sent her like, it's this, no, it's this. And I mean, it was originally written that Yasmin slaps Harper and Harper doesn't slap Yasmin back. And Myha'la rang me and was like, there's no way. And I was like, okay, I got you. And you know, we really love to sort of push each other and play with each other. And it's, you know, we sort of individually give so much to this world and to these characters. So when we're together and it's like, this is our show that we created when we were fresh out of drama school, like, let's do it again. Like, you know, we had so much to do together in season 1 that it's just really nice to get those moments. And when those moments are big, you know, and I say that there's also a scene on the boat together where, you know, Harper puts Yasmin in the shower, and that felt intimate and beautiful. And yeah, I just love working with her. It's really great.
Having seemingly definitively ruptured in that moment, what do you think makes Yasmin extend the olive branch of saying, you can be here at this moment in my life at the very end?
I think Yasmin has transformed, as I said, so much. I think she has so many walls built up around her now. The people that she knew before those walls were built are like, they're in. It's almost like, if you think about, it's like Yasmin is at sort of the center of this like castle that she's built herself. And it just so happens that that Harper and Robert are in that castle because they were there before the walls were built. So whether like they deserve to be there or not, or like they should be there or not, they're not on the wrong side of the wall because they saw her, they know who she is deep down. And I think that, you know, anyone that's suffered like real trauma or has gone through a sort of real transformation, personal characteristic transformation in their life, there are people that they cannot help. They can't lie to them. They can't look at them and say, I'm not, like, I am this person. That person knows exactly who they are. And yeah, and Harper is one of those people for Yasmin, and so is Robert. So they're kind of stuck with each other, I guess.
Speaking of stuck with each other, what kind of marriage do you think Henry and Yasmin are going to have?
I mean, it could go so many ways. It could either function incredibly well as like a sort of partnership and a companionship, more so a partnership. I think that like they see each other quite clearly for at least what they want, like for what their ambitions are. You know, if it's like Yasmin and Henry, like as a company, they're quite good sort of joint CEOs, you know what I mean? But like, as a marriage, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's something that like gets better with time. Maybe it's like, it's a big house. They don't need to see that much of each other if they don't want to.
Speaking for other fans of the show, I was immensely relieved that HBO announced a renewal because so many of the events of the finale seem like very final. It's, you know, Pierpoint is effectively no more. Yasmin seemingly exited the industry. Harper's going back to America. And I'm sure I speak for all of us when I ask, what do you hope to see for season 4? What do you think is going to bring all these people back together?
I mean, I'm just like, I would love to be a fly on the wall in the writer's room, to be honest. Like, I think because Mickey and Conrad are so ambitious for the show. And I don't mean that in a sense of like they want, you know, big, flashy, like all the eyes on them. They want it to be like the best it's ever been every episode. And that's such an amazing place to be in, sort of from like a working point of view. They don't rest on their laurels in any way, shape or form. So like, I'm scared. I'm excited. I can't wait. I mean, it's, you know, obviously we're like in a different world now because the show has been so linked to Pierpoint as an entity for so long. So what does that look like? But the truth is that what they've done so well, I think, is create, as long as Harper is there and Yasmin is there and like these people are around and it is industry. I don't think that they sort of, I think it's great. Also, you know, they were 21 and now they're not, like now they're 27, 28. Their lives are bigger, so the show is bigger. It would be weird to watch them now like making stupid mistakes, like sleeping with the wrong people and like, you know, just kind of like screwing up a small trade. They're getting married. They're like doing these big things. It's like real life stuff. So I think it will just, I think it, you know, if I know making a charact at all, it's just going to get bigger and bigger and the stakes will get higher and higher.
Well, I hope the first thing we see is the wedding.
Me too. I feel like just because she'd wear such a fabulous dress.
Exactly. I need to see what the costume department comes up with. Right. I think that brings our conversation to an end, but thank you so much for taking the time to explicate that performance.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks for coming.